So we're going to start looking at the genealogy of Christ. And you know, Matthew 1 is one of those Bible verses that lots of people tend to skip over. Who starts reading Matthew in chapter 2? Or the very end of chapter 1? Oh, you're all good. I have to confess I've done that before. Because chapter 1 is this list of names. And we go, oh, it can be a bit boring and I don't know how to pronounce them all. So what happens? But you know, this is so much more than just a list of names. And so over the next couple of weeks, I want us to look at the genealogy of Christ, as in Matthew, coming up. And we're going to take the first section today. So we're not going to do all of it. We're going to do the first section. You can see up there, they are all the names that are in Matthew's genealogy for Christ. We're going to do the first 14. So Michelle has just handed out some names. If you have one of the names, when I read it in the Bible, I want you to stand up. Okay? All right, with it. So here is Matthew 1, starting at verse 1. A record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac, the father of Jacob. Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father... Oh, we got Hezron? Anybody got Hezron? Michelle, can you look through those words, those names that are left down there and see if we can find Hezron? Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. We got David? Yep. Oh, sorry, I didn't see anybody stand up. Okay, thanks. Did we find him? Yes. Okay, cool. All right, you can sit down, but as we talk about each one of those people, I'm going to get you to come and peg them up along here, and we're going to peg them in order. Okay? But you can sit down for now. Just now. Okay, you know, earlier in the family tree, earlier in the service, we looked at my family tree going back several generations. And you know, my family tree could be just a list of names. I may not have known anything about them whatsoever. But you know, I remember as a little girl hearing the story of Mary Moynihan. Mary Moynihan was my great-great-grandmother. And I don't know, I never met this woman. I really didn't even, like my memory of my great-grandmother. No, she taught me to crochet. That was pretty good. But you know, I remember her as this old, petite, little, crunched-up lady who sat and crocheted all the day. But Mary Moynihan was her mother. Mary Moynihan came, and I liked it because it just tripped off, you know, the way it trips off the tongue. Mary Moynihan. And it's so great. But then some of my relatives started doing some digging into the family tree. And they discovered that Mary Moynihan grew up in a Scottish castle. Sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? Unfortunately, she wasn't one of the ladies of the castle. She was one of the serfs that did it. She worked on it. This castle was on an island in northwestern Scotland. And she worked there as a maid. And records showed that she was convicted of stealing food and got sent to Australia as a convict. That's okay by me. She was feeding her family. I like to tell myself that. Whether it was true or not, who knows? 15 years ago,
Funnily enough, I had this little boy that came into my classroom. His name was Romulo Moynihan. Now, I have never, ever met anybody with the name Moynihan before. And I said to his mum, I said, that's a really interesting name. I said, I have a great-great-grandmother whose name was Mary Moynihan, who came out from Scotland. She said, well, that's really interesting. She said, my great-grandfather's name was James Moynihan. He came out from Scotland to live with his elder sister, who was elder by about 20 years, whose name was Mary Moynihan. Now, we don't actually know whether it's the same James and Mary. It could well be a common name in Scotland. But, it's the stories. It's the stories that make genealogies interesting, isn't it? It's the stories that we find out. But, as we read this genealogy of Jesus Christ, it's the same thing. There's many names that we're going to recognise, and it's their stories that make it interesting. Jesus was not just born in this vacuum. He was actually born to this big lineage that had been set up and God had been working through for years and years and years and years. So I want to have a think about something. Why does Matthew include the genealogy? Mark doesn't.
No, Matthew is the Jewish gospel.
Matthew is the Jewish gospel. Matthew's whole purpose was to write a gospel to set out to the Jews to prove that Jesus was the Messiah that they had been waiting for. And so to do this, he actually needed to set out this lineage. Now, because when you go into a family tree, if I'm going to have the lineage, if I'm going to have the position, I need to have that I can prove that I'm going backwards. If I was a king, I have to prove that my dad was the king before me. Otherwise, huge wars are fought, aren't they? I love English history. And the War of the Roses is something that I'm quite read a lot about. And I love it because they all go, well, see, he wasn't really the son of that king. The queen had been a bit naughty in the background. And so therefore, it shouldn't be his son that's the king. I should be king. And that's how Richard III became king and then killed his nephews. Charming stuff. But in the case of the Messiah, there were lots of claims that he had to prove so that people would take him seriously. He had to be able to prove that he was the son of Abraham, the son of Isaac, and this was big for the Jews anyway. And Brian, I meant to ask you this the other day, but when I think about the Iwi and your connections with the Iwi, I presume that somewhere along the line, you all know how you're connected to your iwi and go. That would be very important for Māori too, correct? So this was the way that Jesus connected it back. And it's a long way back, out of a room of, 45 of us or so, there were 3 or 4 of us that could go back 5 generations. And of those 3 or 4 of us, I cheated and asked my dad. So that doesn't really count. But they could trace it back for many generations. They all knew who they were connected to all the way back to Abraham. They were more than just a name on a page. Each name represents a life that was lived, memories that were made, relationships that were formed, and ways that God had worked in and through their family. So I want to have a look at these first names, this first section. And we're going to do it by playing Who Am I? Okay? So this is not a service that you can just sit back and go, Kathy's going to do all the work, because you're going to do it. I'm going to give you a clue. You're going to tell us who it is. That person, if you have that name, come and peg it up on the line. We'll start from this end, going across this way. Okay, who am I? I was 99 years old when God told me that I would father a son and have as many descendants as the sky. I'm going to ask Blair because he put his hand up. No, go on, Blair. Tell us who he was. He was Abraham. Who's got Abraham? Okay, come and stick it up for us. Thanks, Hyen. You know, verse 2 says that Abraham was the father of Isaac. And this is the pattern that it comes. You know, if you go into the old KJV, it goes, Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac begat, etc., etc., etc. But it's showing the very human line that's going down here. Now, it's interesting, and I want to say this from the very beginning, because, and lots of people have done lots of study on all this, when you look at this genealogy, there is actually sometimes names that are missed out. And in Jewish terms, that was quite okay. It didn't, because they did it in such so that they could tell the story going through. And it was all about memorization. So the fact that there are 14 generations in the first section and 14 in the second section and 14 in the third section, that's okay for them. But if we go back to Abraham, this is where God set this family up to follow him. God said, I am going to take you, Abraham, and I'm going to give you as many descendants as there are stars in the sky. And he starts promising for the Messiah to come through here. And all people will be blessed because of this. My father, okay, next question. My father took me to the top of a mountain and was going to sacrifice me. Thankfully, God intervened. Who am I? Isaac. Who have we got? Who's got Isaac? Thanks, Deb. You know, the family tree speaks so much more than just names, because these people lived and had families and they had experiences and demonstrated God's love to them. Isaac should not have been born. His dad was almost 100 and his mum was 90. He should not have been born. And he lived on a bit, yeah, they actually grew him, he was actually able to parent him. He came about supernaturally. But then God says to Abraham one day, I want you to go and take this son that you love so much and sacrifice him. And through that, we actually see this beautiful picture of atonement, of substitution, of when God says, no, you don't need to sacrifice him. I can see that you are willing. You can, here is a ram. Go and sacrifice a ram instead. This is the story of Isaac that is in the genealogy of Christ. How about this one? I am one of twins. Although I was the younger, I got my father's inheritance and was blessed and blessing through trickery. I am Jacob. You know, Jacob wasn't a very nice person. If we read in Genesis, he really, really wasn't a nice person. But the very first verse of Matthew says, I am the God... Hang on, no, does it? No, not that Matthew. In the Old Testament, it says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. For some reason, God not only loved Jacob, he put him in the middle of this genealogy, even though he wasn't perfect. Talking about unperfect. I was the fourth of 12 brothers. When my brother Benjamin was accused of stealing Pharaoh's cup, I offered to take his place in Egypt. Go on. No, it wasn't Joseph. Joseph was the brother who was in Egypt. Who was the brother that stood up? Judah. Who's got Judah? Okay. In amongst all this, it's interesting because we see stories of redemption and forgiveness happening all through this genealogy. Joseph's brothers sold him to be a slave in Egypt. Judah was one of the ones that sold him. And yet many years later, when he came cap in hand asking for food, he actually saved Benjamin, who was Joseph's real brother, in every sense of the word. And it's interesting, this genealogy doesn't just say, and Judah, Jacob had a son named Judah. It says Judah and his brothers. That should be a first hint for us. If I was just reading through Matthew and I'd never read Genesis, there's something special about Judah's brothers. These become the 12 tribes of Israel. I'm just reading it through Matthew. How about this one? I was a twin brother of Zerah. Our mother Tamar's first 2 husbands died, and she slept with her father-in-law to have me. Who am I? Perez. Who's got Perez? You know, Tamar was the first woman that is mentioned in the genealogy of Christ. She's not the last. There is actually 5 women mentioned in the genealogy of Christ. Very, very unusual in those days. They didn't normally say them. It was all done male to male to male. But Jesus, this genealogy focuses on the fact that Jesus is the Messiah. And you wouldn't have expected that we're going to have women of loose morals and foreigners in here. And yet as we go through, that's exactly what we see, because God is working his plan out with each and every one of them through this story. I am the son of Perez and the grandson of Judah. Besides being named in the various genealogies throughout the Bible, nothing else is said about me. Who am I? What do we got, Steve? Yep, I'm Hezron. You know, there's a couple of people in this genealogy that we just don't know anything about. We know he was the son of Perez. We know he was Judah's grandson. That's okay. Yep. That's good. Good job, thank you. But you know, if we think about it, Hezron will have his own story. We may not be able to tell it, but Hezron will have a story. And God was still working in and through his lives. I was the second son of Hezron, and also only known through genealogies. Anybody got their Bibles out? And Ram. Now, something struck me as interesting about Ram. Doesn't seem like a very Jewish name, does it? But then I thought about it. He is the great-grandson of Judah. Now, we know that Judah went to Egypt to get some food from Joseph, and then ended up moving his whole family there. And they were there for 400 years. Sound like an Egyptian name? So even as we know this, as we know the stories, we can put some of this together. I was Aaron's grandfather. Who am I? I was Aaron's father-in-law. Who am I? This one has nothing to do with this, but it's a very interesting piece of information. Yes, it was. Aminadab. You've got your Bible open. That's okay. We don't mind you cheating. You know, Aminadab, the name doesn't mean much to me, but again, we see this connection of God at work. He was Aaron's father-in-law. Aaron was Moses' brother. And Moses was the person who led the people through the promised land. This Aminadab, he actually was probably a man of quite a lot of influence. If he was the father-in-law of Aaron, as they're going through, I would have thought that he would have had something to say here. When we go to the promised land, I was the head of the tribe of Judah. Who am I? Somebody better cheat from their Bible. Who am I? I was Nashon. You know, each tribe had someone leading it. And Nashon was the leader of the tribe of Judah. It was one of the biggest and the strongest tribes. And for the Jews, reading through this genealogy, they would be recognizing these names. For us, it would be like reading through going, Queen Elizabeth, Prince Charles, etc., etc. And they're going, okay, this is Jesus. Jesus is going, this is Jesus. I married Rahab the prostitute after she saved the spies from being caught in Jericho. You? No, it wasn't David. It was Salmon. Okay. You know, the second woman named in this genealogy is Rahab the prostitute. I wonder what life was like for her. She joined the Israelites after watching them totally smash down Jericho. All her family survived, but everybody else was killed. And she went to live with them, and she became one of them. She became one of them so much that she was named in this genealogy with Christ. My mother and wife were both foreigners who were named in the lineage of Christ. Who am I? Boaz. Who's got Boaz? You know, Boaz probably knew a little bit about what it was like to be an outsider. When we think about Ruth's story and how Boaz was so kind to her. And I remember it was a long time of reading that story before I realised that his mother was Rahab. And how much had that influenced the way that he was actually going to interact with Ruth? I had many sons, but David, the youngest, was the one whom God chose to be king. Who am I? No, other way. Jesse. You know, Jesse's big claim to fame was that he was the father of King David. And when they start talking about David, they go, David, the son of Jesse. And yet, often, we end up hearing that rather than he was Jesse's, David, the father of Jesse, it's rather than Jesse, David, the son of Jesse, it's Jesse, the father of David. Because, of course, who comes next? David. I want to read you these words that David wrote. While he was still king, he said, "The Lord says to my Lord, sit at the right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your stool." He's already looking forward to the time where Jesus is going to come and saying, I am going to sit at the footstool of, someone who is going to be so much greater than I. King David, probably one of the greatest kings that the Israelites have ever known. And Jesus is the King of Kings. David says, he's my king. And we're going to, next week as we look at the next bit, and we're having a look at, a lot of them are kings in their own right. But Jesus is the King of Kings. This is his story. This is his lineage. God is at work through this family from before Abraham, but right the way through. Regardless of where they lived, regardless of whether they lived in Haran like Abraham, or whether they were wandering like these guys in through here, or whether they were in Egypt like Ram, or whether they were on the way to the promised land, or the king of the promised land, God was working in their midst. We've missed Obed. Obed should have been before Boaz. Bring Obed back here. Isn't he after? Sorry, hang on. Solomon, Boaz, Obed, Jesse. Yes, you're right. He is the son of Ruth and Boaz. The lineage of Christ. These people are there regardless of their sex. So unusual in those days. I haven't put the women up here because I've just put the men down. But 5 women are named. And not one of them is probably what some of their neighbours would call upright. But they were in front of God. This is a family of leaders. You look all the way through. These are leaders. Abraham was a leader. Jacob was a leader. Don't know about those guys. Boaz was a leader in his community. He was a man, even though he may not have been the leader of his tribe at that time, he was a man that was upright and known. And this was where Jesus came. This chapter is not just a list of names. This is a chapter that tells us the story of all the Old Testament coming through together to the cross, to Jesus. And that's where we're going to look for the next couple of weeks. Let's just pray. Lord, I thank you for the way that you work all things together. You have woven your story through the Old Testament, and you can prove it. Lord, for those that go, there's no connection between what the promises that you made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and David in Jesus Christ, and yet here we see it all spread out in front of us. Lord, give us the strength of conviction that Jesus Christ truly is the Messiah, the one that you were talking about. Help us to recognise your story, not just through the lives of Jesus' ancestors, but through our own family ties as well. Lord, you are working in and through each one of us for generations upon generations upon generations. We're going to sing What Child Is This in a minute. What child is this? This is the son of Abraham, the son of Isaac, the son of Jacob, the son of Judah, the son of Perez, the son of Hezron, the son of Ram, the son of Amminadab, the son of Nashon, the son of Solomon, the son of Boaz, the son of Obed, the son of Jesse, the son of David. Our mighty God. Amen.